It was just after midnight on a humid Memphis night in 1973. The gates of Graceland stood silent under the floodlights, shielding the mansion from the world outside. Inside, in the dimly lit jungle room, Elvis Presley paced the carpeted floor, his silk pajamas clinging to his sweat-dampened skin. The king of rock and roll, adored by millions, couldn't sleep. Again. He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed. On the other end, his personal physician, Dr. George Nichopoulos, known simply as Dr. Nick, answered, voice groggy but alert. "I need something, Doc," Elvis whispered, urgency cutting through the exhaustion. "The thoughts won't stop." It was a call like so many others, one that never made the headlines, buried under layers of secrecy and loyalty. The world saw Elvis as unbreakable, charismatic, electric on stage, hips swiveling, voice commanding arenas. But behind those iron gates, the reality was quieter, more confined. Isolation wrapped around him like the heavy curtains in his bedroom, drawn tight against prying eyes. Fame had built Graceland into a fortress, but it also turned it into a cage. He rarely ventured out unrecognized. Instead, nights blurred into rituals of seclusion. Pills to wake up. Pills to wind down. A Bible on the nightstand, pages worn from hours of reading spiritual texts, searching for answers in the silence. Contrast that with the public spectacle. Sold-out shows in Vegas, where he'd dazzle under spotlights, sweat pouring as he belted out Suspicious Minds. Applause thundered. Fans screamed. Yet back in his suite, alone amid the opulence, the applause faded to echoes. Self-doubt crept in. Fears rooted deep in his Tupelo childhood, poverty's shadow, the loss of his twin brother at birth, the relentless drive to provide for his mother, Gladys. She was his anchor. Her death in 1958 while he served in the army shattered him. He wept uncontrollably at her funeral, collapsing into friends' arms, a raw grief the cameras captured only in glimpses. But privately, it lingered, fueling a paranoia that fame could vanish, leaving him destitute again. Short bursts of control. Long stretches of surrender. His relationships were managed like his career by Colonel Tom Parker, the ever-present manager who orchestrated public outings with starlets for the tabloids. Natalie Wood. Connie Stevens. They posed for photos, smiles perfect. But Elvis confided little. He preferred the company of younger women, innocent dynamics that echoed his bond with Gladys. Pillow fights in pajamas. Cuddling without pressure. No risks of pregnancy or scandal. With Priscilla it started in Germany, her at 14, him 24. He molded her hair dyed black, clothes chosen to match his vision. They married in 1967, a quick Vegas ceremony shrouded in secrecy. Lisa Marie arrived 9 months later. Publicly the ideal family. Privately, strains grew. His occult books piled up. Tarot readings in closed rooms. Whispers of infidelity, though loyalty bound his inner circle tight. That circle, the Memphis Mafia. Joe Esposito. Red West. Sonny West. They lived on his payroll, a brotherhood forged in late-night escapades. But it was controlled. Loyalty tests. Gifts lavish one day, tempers flaring the next. Elvis once fired a gun into a television screen, shattering it because he disliked the performer on air. The bang echoed through the halls. His men cleaned up the mess, no questions. No leaks. Power in public, but in those moments, a loss of grip. Habits deepened the divide. Insomnia gnawed at him, a relic of army days and the grind of Hollywood films he loathed. Prescription drugs flowed, amphetamines for energy, barbiturates for sleep. Dr. Nick prescribed them legally, packets labeled for energy or vitamins. Elvis believed they were safe, necessary. But they blurred the edges, turning vibrant days into foggy hazes. One such night in 1972, after a show, he retreated to his room. The crowd's roar still rang in his ears. Priscilla was downstairs, but the distance felt vast. He dialed a friend, voice low. "I feel like I'm losing it all," he admitted, words rarely spoken aloud. The fear of irrelevance. Of health failing under the weight gain, the swelling from medications. Decisions weighed heavy to or more? Cut ties? But the machine rolled on. Colonel's contracts locked him in. And then, as dawn approached on another sleepless vigil. Elvis sat in the shadowed corner of his bedroom, the heavy velvet drapes blocking out the first hints of light. The room smelled of polished wood and lingering cologne, a sanctuary cluttered with gold records leaning against walls, forgotten trophies of a life under constant scrutiny. He flipped through a dog-eared copy of The Impersonal Life, a spiritual tome that promised enlightenment, but tonight it offered no solace. His hands, once steady on a guitar neck, now fidgeted with a vial of pills, tiny capsules that held the fragile promise of rest. Pop one. Wait. Feel the edges soften. It was a routine etched into his days, a private battle against the insomnia that clawed at him, born from years of erratic schedules and the weight of expectations. Publicly, he was the icon of vitality. Jumpsuits glittering under arena lights, body moving with that signature grace, drawing screams from crowds that stretched to the horizons. But here, in the quiet hours, the contrast sharpened. Isolation deepened. The mansion's halls echoed empty, even with the Memphis mafia scattered in guest rooms below. They were his shield, his companions, yet even they couldn't pierce the solitude that fame imposed. Elvis would wander those halls barefoot, robe trailing, stopping at windows to peer through slits in the curtains at the fans camped outside the gates. Devoted. Unwavering. But their adoration felt distant, like applause from a dream. He feared it slipping away. What if the hits dried up? What if the body betrayed him further, the bloating from steroids and salt-heavy diets turning the mirror into an enemy? Short decisions. Long regrets. One such choice came in 1969, after Nixon's White House visit. Elvis, badge in hand as a federal agent at large for the Bureau of Narcotics, felt empowered. A badge against his own demons, perhaps. He collected law enforcement memorabilia obsessively, badges, guns, uniforms, storing them in locked cabinets, symbols of control in a life spinning wild. But privately it masked hypocrisy. His own dependency grew. Phone calls to Dr. Nick increased, coded requests for medication, delivered in unmarked envelopes. Just to get through the tour, he'd say, voice steady but eyes betraying the plea. The doctor complied, bound by friendship and the king's charisma. No one outside knew. The press painted him as anti-drug, a moral crusader, while upstairs, drawers hid the evidence. Relationships frayed under this veil. Priscilla, once his fairy tale bride, navigated the mansion like a ghost in her own home. Their marriage, announced with fanfare, hid tensions. He adored Lisa Marie, cradling her in quiet moments, singing lullabies in that deep baritone. But with Priscilla, intimacy waned. Controlled affection. No spontaneity. He dictated schedules, appearances, even her makeup, blue eyeshadow to match his ideals. Arguments simmered behind closed doors, whispers about his time on the road, entourages of women who adored without demands. One night in 1972, after a Vegas stint, he returned to find her distant, eyes red from unspoken words. "Why can't we just be normal?" she asked in the dim kitchen light, coffee cooling between them. He paused, fork midway to his mouth, peanut butter and banana sandwich, a comfort from childhood. No answer came easy. Fame had rewritten normalcy. Habits anchored him. Late-night movie marathons in the basement theater, reels of westerns and karate flicks flickering across the screen. Heat practice moves, kicking at shadows, bodyguards joining in mock fights that left bruises hidden under costumes. Laughter echoed, then a brief escape. But as the films ended, reality intruded. Fears of assassination, planted by anonymous letters, led to armed vigils. Guns under pillows. Bodyguards on rotation. Power in the spotlight, but loss at home, control slipping through medicated fogs. Unsettling events punctuated the routine. In 1974, during a tour break, a stranger approached the gates at dusk, note in hand. Security intercepted it, a rambling threat, laced with jealousy over Elvis's success. He read it alone in his study, lights low, cigar smoke curling. Heart racing. Paranoia spiked. That night he called President Nixon again, voice urgent, seeking more badges, more authority. The call went unreturned, leaving him staring at the receiver, the dial tone a mocking reminder of vulnerability. Deeper into the nights, spiritual searches intensified. Closed-room seances with trusted friends, candles flickering as they sought messages from Gladys. Whispers of her presence brought tears, a raw vulnerability the world never saw. Yet doubt lingered. Was it real? Or just the drugs whispering back? As another evening descended on Graceland, the phone rang unexpectedly, a voice from the past, stirring memories long buried. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. As another evening descended on Graceland, the phone rang unexpectedly, a voice from the past, stirring memories long buried. Elvis lifted the receiver in his upstairs office, the one room even more private than the bedroom, stacked with spiritual books and locked cabinets of badges and guns. The caller was Larry Geller, his hairdresser turned spiritual confidant, the man who'd introduced him to esoteric texts years earlier, back when the Memphis Mafia grumbled about that long-haired guru stealing their time with the boss. Geller had been pushed out in the late 60s, tensions high as the guys resented the shift from parties to philosophy. But now, in 1975, Elvis reached out again, voice thick with the haze of medication and midnight longing. "Larry," he said softly, "I need to talk about the books. The signs. Mother's been reaching out." Those spiritual searches had intensified through the years, a quiet counterpoint to the roar of concerts and the flash of Vegas lights. Publicly, Elvis was the gospel-singing son of the South, belting "How Great Thou Art" to thunderous ovations, awards piling up for records that touched the divine. But privately, in closed rooms with drawn curtains, he delved deeper. Books on numerology, reincarnation, the Kabbalah, piled beside the Bible on his nightstand. He wore necklaces layered with symbols, the Christian cross, the Jewish Chai and Star of David, the Egyptian Ankh, even Islamic crescents. "Don't want to miss out on heaven over a technicality," he joked to close friends, but the words carried weight. Nights found him meditating in the jungle room, surrounded by carved tiki gods and green shag, seeking visions or messages from Gladys, whose death still haunted him like an open wound. Unsettling moments marked these quests. In the early 70s, he'd gather small circles, trusted aides, sometimes Linda Thompson, his girlfriend then, young and devoted, for quiet sessions in dimly lit rooms. Candles flickered on tables as they held hands, calling out to spirits, hoping for Gladys's voice or presence. Elvis would sit rigid, eyes closed, sweat beading despite the air conditioning, waiting for a sign, a chill, a whisper, a knock. Tears came easily when he spoke of her, the woman who'd been his everything, protector in poverty, confidant in fame. Her grave, moved to Graceland's meditation garden after a botched theft attempt in '77. Wait, no, earlier fears prompted the relocation, became a focal point. He'd visit alone at dusk, placing flowers, talking aloud about fears the public never heard. Health fading, relevance slipping, the paranoia that enemies lurked beyond the gates. Contrast sharpened here too. On stage, power, absolute, crowds hanging on every note, karate kicks drawing gasps. Off stage, vulnerability ruled. Insomnia gripped tighter, a holdover from army days and endless tours. He'd pace upstairs halls, robe open, calling down for company. Billy Smith, his cousin, often obliged, the two talking through the night about old Tupelo days or cosmic mysteries, Elvis sometimes drifting to sleep in their bed amid nightmares of loss. Pills helped, prescribed packets from Dr. Nick, delivered discreetly, labeled innocuously. Elvis trusted them implicitly, believing they fueled his energy for fans. But they clouded judgment, amplified doubts. One night in '76, after a show where weight gain hid under capes and the voice strained, he stared into the mirror, whispering, "Who's that old man?" Isolation deepened. Even the mafia, loyal as ever, couldn't bridge the gap. Linda Thompson bore much of the private burden then, moving into Graceland in '72 after Priscilla's departure. She became caregiver, nurse in silk pajamas, waking to his calls, reading scriptures aloud, soothing rages when televisions shattered under gunfire. "If I don't like the guy," he'd say casually, pulling the trigger at Robert Goulet or some news anchor. Clean up swift, no questions. Yet tenderness surfaced too, playful snowball fights on rented slopes, private screenings where he'd sing along to old films. But strains grew. Elvis's obsessions with food, firearms, spiritual proofs pulled him inward. Phone calls multiplied, to doctors for refills, to old flames stirring nostalgia, to psychics promising insights. And on this call with Geller, words poured out, questions about past lives, soul contracts, why pain persisted despite prayer. Geller listened patiently, suggesting a visit, books to reread. Elvis hesitated. The guy's still wary, Colonel Parker dismissive of that mumbo-jumbo. But need one. "Come soon," he murmured, hanging up as dawn crept through cracks in the drapes. Hours later, a car pulled quietly through the gates, headlights off to avoid fans. Geller stepped out, briefcase of texts in hand, greeted by a bodyguard's nod. Upstairs, Elvis waited, Bible open, eyes expectant. Hours later, a car pulled quietly through the gates, headlights off to avoid fans. Geller stepped out, briefcase of texts in hand, greeted by a bodyguard's nod. Upstairs, Elvis waited, Bible open, eyes expectant. The two men embraced like old brothers separated by years and circumstance, the air thick with the scent of incense Elvis had lit earlier, a faint sandalwood haze lingering from a stick he'd burned while meditating alone. They settled into the deep chairs facing each other, the room dimly lit by a single lamp casting long shadows over stacks of books, Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography beside Cairo's works on numerology, the Urantia book propped against a worn copy of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Elvis leaned forward, voice low and earnest, recounting visions he'd had during recent sleepless nights, glimpses of light, whispers he believed were from Gladys, questions about why his body felt heavier, why energy drained despite the crowd's adoration. Geller listened, nodding, pulling volumes from his case to mark passages Elvis had underlined years before. They spoke of karma, of soul missions, Elvis confessing his fear that fame was both gift and curse, a vehicle for spreading love through music, yet a barrier to true peace. Publicly he commanded stages, jumpsuit gleaming, voice soaring through unchained melody, in sold-out halls, fans reaching out as if touching divinity. Privately in these closed sessions doubt surfaced raw. Health issues mounted, bloating from retained fluids, constipation chronic from diets heavy in fried foods, and the opioids masking pain from old injuries. Dr. Nick's envelopes arrived regularly, packets of Dilaudid for discomfort, Quaaludes for rest, amphetamines to spark the fire for performances. Elvis rationalized them as tools, prescribed legally, necessary to fulfill obligations to fans, to Colonel Parker's relentless schedule. Relationships shifted again. Linda Thompson had left the year prior, exhausted by the caregiving role, the midnight vigils reading scriptures aloud until he drifted off. Now Ginger Alden shared his bed, young and beautiful, engaged after a whirlwind romance. She brought lightness, plans for a Christmas wedding discussed in the master bathroom, sketches of gowns, a pyramid-shaped chapel in mind. Yet even here, control lingered, curfews for her outings, jealousy flaring at mentions of old friends. Nights, he'd wake her for racquetball in the private court or drives in the Stutz Blackhawk, headlights cutting through Memphis darkness, bodyguards trailing. Habits deepened, isolation, television stockpiled after shootings, guns always near, badges collected as talismans of authority. As 1977 wore on, tours grueled him. Shows powerful still, but weight gain hidden under scarves, voice straining on high notes. Back at Graceland between legs, spiritual intensity peaked. Geller's visits became anchors, hours lost in discussion of reincarnation, Elvis wondering if he'd lived before as a healer or leader. Fears unspoken to most, irrelevance looming, body failing, the paranoia of threats real or imagined. Phone calls to Dr. Nick increased, attacks of breathing trouble, pain packets requested. Deliveries discreet, loyalty absolute. In August, after a tour wrap, Elvis returned home energized yet fragile. Plans swirled, new recordings at Graceland, a fresh start. Ginger found him optimistic, discussing Hawaii trips, family expansion. On the 15th he played racquetball late, then piano in the early hours, singing gospel softly. Insomnia struck again. He took his usual packets for sleep, told Ginger he'd read in the bathroom, his lisping throne room, stacked with books even there. She dozed off. Morning light filtered through heavy curtains. Ginger stirred around noon, realizing the bed empty beside her. No alarm at first, routine for his nocturnal rhythm. She dressed slowly, makeup applied, then knocked on the bathroom door. No answer. Pushing it open, the sight froze her. Elvis on the floor, face down, pajama bottoms around ankles, book fallen nearby. Rigid. Cold hours already. Panic erupted, calls downstairs, attempts to revive futile. Ambulance rushed him to Baptist Memorial, but pronouncement came swift, cardiac arrhythmia, underlying strains too great. Graceland descended into controlled chaos. Vernon collapsed in grief, the mafia coordinating, fans gathering at gates. The world learned gradually, headlines shattering the myth of invincibility. Yet in those final private moments, unseen by all, the king had sought solace in pages and pills, alone in a room that was both refuge and prison. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story.